see you all today. Thank you so much for coming out. Normally when the 12 o'clock rings, everybody runs out of the church to go home and get some lunch, but here you all stuck around a little bit. Thank you very much for doing that. I know that seeing other people's slides and photos of their trips can get a little tedious, so we're going to try to kind of move through this fairly quickly. Sarah and I had a wonderful time on this trip. We'll tell you a little bit about it as we go. Sarah has got to step out in just a minute. Becca's on her way back from a class trip, and so is going to be waiting without anyone to pick her up unless Sarah steps out to do that. So let's pray, and then we'll begin to just talk to you a little bit about this trip that we had a chance to be a part of. So, gracious God, we do give you thanks and praise for this particular day, an opportunity to reflect on, an opportunity to travel and to be a part of a pilgrimage. To think a little bit about our faith and the places that shape it and the ways in which it continues to be a part of living out our faith in the world today. Guide us and lead us in this conversation. Help us to dream a little together as well. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so yes, in the first 2 weeks in January, Sarah and I had a chance to travel. Footsteps of Paul trip was mostly in Greece with a little bit in Turkey. Was a trip designed sort of for pastors and for their spouses. This is us kind of in front of the Parthenon, as you can see. If anybody y'all can see the pictures, I hope that we can at least, we'll send them out if you've got an interest in seeing them later as well. So. We traveled as a part of what we thought would be an interesting piece of a spiritual pilgrimage. And that's a little different than just sort of taking a trip, right? Is to try to take it as a spiritual pilgrimage. This is a wonderful definition, I think. It says to journey without being changed is just to be a nomad. To change without journeying is to be a chameleon. To journey and be transformed by the journey is to be a pilgrim, right? Is to be a pilgrim. And I think that's our goal as we travel in a spiritual kind of way, right? Is that somehow both in the journey itself and in what we experience, what we encounter, that we are somehow changed, right, by that experience. And it helps us to be more faithful when we return, to think about how we live in the midst of the world in which we live today. So we traveled with a group called Elias Tours, your connection to the Holy Lands. Elias was born in Bethlehem in Palestine. He was been a part of tourism pretty much all of his life. And so he's seen, as he says, both the good and the bad sides of tourism and travel, for there is certainly both. And he has designed a sort of a company, originally started out taking church trips to the Holy Land itself, but has since expanded. And the trip, sort of the Footsteps of Paul, is their most popular trip now, but they've also expanded, and now they're doing trips to Egypt, trips to Italy. We'll talk a little bit more about that kind of as we get to the end. Part of the trip that we took was again this pastors and spouse trip that was in the first part of January. And Elias has made that sort of an annual time in which he tries to offer a trip for pastors and spouses. There's some sense in which that's an opportunity to say thanks for pastors and for their spouses for all that happens, especially in the last quarter of the year, Christmas, Advent, all those kind of things. It's a good time for them to take a step back and be able to kind of take a trip and recharge and regenerate some of their faith. It also has the practical side, right? They offer it at a discounted rate to encourage us to go in the hopes that we'll have a great experience in time, come back and talk to our congregations, and then hopefully do more trips with them in the future, right? So that's part of why we're doing it here. So it's a business model for them as well, but it does kind of a combination of both. There were 60, just over 60 people on this trip, which meant we had 2 buses in which we went. They initially sort of decided it was going to be sort of a 1-bus trip, but had so much interest from others that wanted to go that they ended up expanding it to 60. Elias has got a long-standing relationship in the Lutheran Church, in the ELCA, and so I think of the 60 people on the trip, there were 2 Presbyterians. That's us, right? Yeah. There was 1 Episcopalian, and there were 57 Lutherans, right? So we learned a lot about Luther and a lot about the Lutheran Church as a part of our particular trip. So we sort of our trip was about, again, the journeys of Paul. This is this slide, you probably can't see this map at all, but this has sort of a larger trip that we would talk about and we could talk about later as well. But essentially, we visited Athens, which is sort of here on the map. We went to Meteora, which is sort of the sites of the monasteries. We'll show you some pictures of that. And then also Corinth, which is over here. Talked a little bit about that today. And then we flew over here to Izmir, which is up here, and ended up in Pisadasi, which is near Ephesus. And so seeing the things around Ephesus as well. And then flew home from Istanbul. So that was sort of our particular trip. There's more things to see, especially Thessalonica, Philippi, some other places up north that we would want to include, some of the Greek islands as well, if we wanted to take a church trip like this in the future. Some of that means that we went in January, which meant that there were 0 crowds. You could just walk right into everything, but not everything's open either because it's not sort of a touristy time. The cruise ships don't run to the islands, right, in January either. So various times you just have to think about the kind of things that you do. Because of this particular trip was sort of designed for pastors and spouses, we had 2 professors who went along with us and gave kind of lectures at various places that we went. Caroline Lewis is a professor of New Testament at Luther Seminary in Minneapolis, a wonderful preacher and teacher. And then Michael Chan is he's the Old Testament professor. He's the executive director for faith and learning at Concordia College, which is out in California now. So having both of those perspectives, I thought was really exciting and helpful to be able to learn from both of them, and particularly to place Paul in the context of being an Old Testament, growing out of the Old Testament for Paul, not just seeing him through the letters that he writes in the New Testament as well, or the book of Acts. So. All right, in Athens, we stayed in a hotel that had a rooftop sort of restaurant, and this was our view every evening, was to sort of see the Acropolis right out, which is lit up, kind of dominates the scene there. We did spend a day sort of visiting that. This is sort of, again, the Parthenon is a part of the Acropolis up on top of that hill there. This picture here is probably a little harder for you to see. This is the Agora, which is sort of the marketplace. And in Athens at the time of Paul, it was not just sort of like a supermarket, like we would think of a marketplace. It was also the headquarters and the center of like political life. And this is like where Socrates would be wandering around teaching his disciples, right? So education, learning, politics, commerce, all of that kind of happens here in the Agora. You may be able to see kind of up in this corner, this is the Acropolis. It sits right on top of it, right? And so Paul here, as he's teaching and preaching in the Agora, is he's right in the shadow, right, of all of the Greek gods that are sort of lifted up there as well. So in between is the Areopagus, which is sort of called Mars Hill. In Acts 17, this is sort of where Paul gets taken. He's been teaching and preaching. The philosophers, the leaders of the community are like, we're kind of curious about what it is that you're talking about here. It seems like you're talking about some foreign unknown gods. And so Paul is taken here to this particular location, which had a sort of a judicial court kind of sense to it. And he was able to begin his sort of great sermon in Athens, where he speaks and preaches about connecting their unknown gods. You have an altar to unknown gods, right? I'm going to tell you about who this God is, right? And who this God has been revealed to us in Jesus Christ. And so it's a wonderful kind of location. But again, it is, the Agora is right down below, right? And right over your shoulder is the Acropolis and the Parthenon, right? So you're sitting right in between this sort of sense of these are all the foreign gods, the idols and things that the people of Athens are worshiping. This is the community life. Somehow Paul kind of synthesizes all of that, right, in this great sermon in Acts 17. A really unique kind of place there, right? So the next day we sort of drove up to Meteora, which again is a place. It literally means hanging from nowhere. Hanging from nowhere. And so essentially what happened is that they've got these unique kind of rock formations that just kind of sit out in the middle of the countryside here. And originally they built 24 monasteries at the top of these different peaks. And for many centuries, the monks were just using scaffolding for climbing the rocks. That's how they kind of got their supplies up there. These are 4 different pictures of them, right? So eventually they started using nets with like hooks and ladders, rope ladders, that they would carry things up and down in order to get things there. Sometimes a basket was used. Wooden ladders more than 40 meters long, sort of how they used to be accessed before they started building the roads and everything else. It's just sort of an inspiring kind of place. Out of the 24 monasteries that were originally there, 6 are still active today. We were able to visit 3 to 4 of them, I guess. 3, I guess. Visited 3, could see the others. But they just sort of hang out of the sky on top of these rock formations. It's really kind of an incredible kind of thing. So we spent an afternoon there, spent the night in the town just below, and then came back and saw the other monasteries the next morning, and then headed back to Athens. So I think Sarah and I have talked, if we were going to be a part of the trip and wanted to see these monasteries, there would be a way to kind of do it on the way to other places. It seemed like we wasted almost a day of travel, kind of getting up there and getting back. But I think there's other ways to be able to see this that would be a little more travel efficient, I think, in a different time of year.
Now, could you stay in the monasteries?
I did not see anyone staying in the monasteries, no. So most of them, they had little chapels. They had sort of little communities where the nuns or the monks were staying themselves. They did not seem to have any guest houses. So, yep.
Did you have to climb up there?
We did not have to climb, that's right. So there are roads now that will lead to around. We did park above one and sort of hiked down to it. So that was another option to get to one as well.
They will take you to the ones that you have to rappel to.
Right, yes, exactly, that's right, yep, so, yeah. And this one here, just for any James Bond fans, so this is one behind us. This one here was the one that was in the James Bond film For Your Eyes Only. They were sort of trying to rappel up and be, I don't know. Apparently, from what they told us, the monastery wasn't necessarily informed they were going to be in this movie. Anyway, but yes, but that's the one. That's right. That would have been in the movie. So. All right. We spent a day in Corinth. As I said this morning, we learned it's sort of a huge metropolitan city at the time, and 400,000 people there. It really sits between the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea, and so goods were transported from one to the other. It's a very small sort of strip of land. At that time, they were able to sort of just create a road to transport things from one to another, which gave Corinth a very cosmopolitan, very commercial kind of character to it. Now, I didn't put a picture here, but there's a canal that's been built. It's pretty narrow, so it's not like you're taking, big tanker ships through there or anything, but it does allow for commerce to sort of transport between the two areas. Let's see, so this is sort of us just kind of in front of the ruins of Corinth. This is another picture of that. This was a big rock fountain, and our guide pointed out that, in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul references back to how the Israelites on their Exodus journey drank from the rock, and he says now the rock was Christ, and so this fountain was actually sort of the fountain of the rock. And so it would have been an image that maybe the folks in Corinth would have been able to kind of connect with or recognize. This is sort of ruins of the Temple of Apollo here as well, which is sort of one of the larger pieces that still survives there in this ancient part of Corinth. Also in Corinth, so I mentioned this morning that there was a healing cult there as well. The Greek physician who was sort of known as the son of Apollo was Asclepios. Was a popular healing god in the Greco-Roman world. And so they had these sort of a temple here, as well as many folks. These are all statues. I don't know if you can see in the picture. None of them have any heads, none of them have any arms. All those things have been either removed or other pieces as well. They also have a museum there, because part of the way in which you would say thanks to the god for your healing was making a plaster sort of cast or a plaster statue of the piece of your body that was healed. And so they have uncovered all of these feet and arms and fingers and lots of other body parts too that we probably don't want to mention, right? I mean, all of these are in the museum, right? But it does give us a sense, anyway, that perhaps this is one of the reasons that Paul's sort of illustration of you are the body of Christ, individually members of it, but together, this larger sense that Mark wrote in 1 Corinthians 12. Again, these are just things that may have made sense to the people of Corinth because this is a part of the world, the culture in which they're living, right? We also saw just in the museum, 1 Corinthians 13:12. Now I see in a mirror dimly. Someday we'll see face to face. Y'all maybe seen these before, bronze mirrors. You can polish them up so you could see fairly well, but it's nothing like looking in the mirror today, right? And so that's just an example of a bronze mirror from that time. That, again, made sense to people in Corinth as Paul's using these illustrations and these examples. So I'll let you stop listening to me here for a second. This is a video that they put together of our trip in Ephesus. So. All right, so Ephesus, as you can see in the video, is really well preserved. So probably one of the better preserved sort of places in the ancient world. Part of it was that the city itself was abandoned, and no one sort of came over and started taking all the pieces away to build new things. And so it became fairly well preserved. They think that probably haven't even uncovered a quarter, right? Yeah, of all that they could uncover as they continued to work there. The pieces that are available there now, you can really like a mile and a half, sort of walk, down the hill through the city, all the ancient temples. The big piece that sort of starts there, we saw several pictures of it, is the library, which is sort of the place that they show most of at that point. So. This is a picture sort of the Agora in Ephesus. Paul is a part of teaching and preaching. The artisans in the marketplace in Ephesus are not pleased because he is drawing resources and attention and certainly finances away from their business of making idols. So there's a riot that happens sort of in Ephesus here in Acts 19. This is sort of the potential place where that would have been as a part of the city there. Let's see, Revelation chapter 2, Revelation. Ephesus is one of the 7 cities that Revelation is addressed to, and so it reminds us that the Christian community in Ephesus was actually pretty established and striving and thriving, right, at this time. There are various symbols. That's sort of a circle with 8 different crosses in it. We might think of ichthus and the fish sometimes as an early Christian symbol. This was another way to create that symbol as well. If you take the letters and sort of make crosses and thetas and things, you can make this sort of symbol using the letters that you spell ichthus, sort of for Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And so that's it's found on various cobblestones and things along the way as well. I'll throw this picture in as well. Ephesus was known for having good sanitation. This is sort of a public restroom. You can imagine not a lot of privacy here, right? But there was this trench with running water that went underneath, so it actually would keep things as about as clean and sanitary as they possibly can. But again, all this immensely well preserved. You can see all these kind of things today as well. So. Also in Ephesus, just sort of outside, sort of the tradition and the history is that you might remember in the Gospel of John, as Jesus is hanging on the cross, he tells the disciple John that Mary is now entrusted to his care, right? This is your mother, this is your son. The Christian tradition is that over the course of a couple years, John moved Mary out of Jerusalem and took her to Ephesus. And then this was a house that they believed that maybe Mary would have lived in. You can't take pictures inside or anything else. It's a pretty small sort of structure. Would not have been a place that they would have really tried to advertise, right? Because the Christian community is pretty still sort of under some threat in these early days. But 3 different popes have been to this site. They have built different sort of recognitions of that. But again, sort of a unique kind of spiritual place and moment to think about. Maybe Mary's living here after Jesus' death and resurrection until her own death, right? Also in Kusadasi, sort of began to see a little bit of culture. We got a chance to visit a shop where they sort of still handmade Turkish rugs. This is a woman who's sort of engaged in that process here. You can see all of her string and cloth and things here. This is just some examples of the rugs that they showed us. Again, beautiful, wonderful kind of things. And they also wanted to make sure that since we were in Turkey, that we would get to see a flying carpet. Right. so they just sort of told it like they would pizza dough, right? Just above their heads, and wanted us to see that as well. So. Also, a couple other places. And when we were still in Athens, Sarah and I had a chance to visit the Panenthetic Stadium. This was sort of built for the first modern Olympic Games in 1896. They continue to use it today, both for athletic kind of things. This is the site where the marathon finishes in Athens every year, various things along those. Let's see. This was a shop outside the city of Ephesus, right? Genuine fake watches, right? I thought that was the kind of thing that all the Americans would go to, right? Everybody would go and visit this, right? Genuine fake watches, right? And there's the 2 of us sitting outside a cafe with some Turkish coffee as well. So why might we as a church want to be a part of a trip like this, right? I think there are a couple reasons we might want to consider, a spiritual pilgrimage kind of trip. The first is that there's something powerful about journeying to and exploring different cultures and history, right? I think there's something just valuable about that, right, in and of itself. Well, why might you want to do it as a part of a church trip, right? Well, if you go on these kinds of trips, spiritual pilgrimage trips, we'll see and experience biblical and historical sites. Not just sort of, again, vacation trips to different cultures and places, but places that have biblical and historical meaning so that our own lives and our own faith might be changed. Again, that's part of this pilgrimage idea. It's important as well, I think, to meet and interact with those who practice Christian faith and other faiths in different lands. Right? We might think, everybody practices Christian faith like we do in Fort Mill, South Carolina. That's really not the case, right? And so to have the opportunity to think and reflect and talk with those who practice their faith in other places brings great value for us as well. And the last thing is that to travel and build community with other members of the congregation. Sarah, I know you were saying about what you most enjoyed was being a part of this group, right? So do you want to say a word?
We have 57 best Lutheran friends now, right?
We do, that's right, yes. Yeah, we have all kinds of new Lutheran Facebook friends, I tell you, right? Yes, now that was probably one of the better parts of the trip for us, right? Was just traveling together, right, as a part of this particular group, right? So where might we want to go, all right, if this is something that we're interested in doing or being a part of? There are several different options, places that we might consider. Here are just a few of those, right? Journeys of Greece, Journeys of Paul in the Greek islands. Again, it's Elias's most popular tour right now. They've actually booked all of their trips for 2025 and are already looking ahead to dates into 2026, which is, again, I think if we were to take a church trip, we would be thinking sometime in spring or fall of 2026, maybe summer, depends. I don't know, we have to think about that together, right? They've got the newest trip is this Italy Faith, Food, and Wine tour, which has become popular for them as well. The Best of Egypt trip is something that they've also explored as well. It has a little more Old Testament, sort of Exodus kind of focus to it on that particular trip. There are lots of different Reformation tours. Elias does some because he's got so many Lutheran friends. Most of those are pretty Germany Luther focused, but there are ways to do Geneva, Calvin, other kind of things, and build that in as well. This is a trip that from SCOTUS Tours, which goes to Scotland. The particular person who leads those is getting ready to retire, but they'll be transferred and opportunities as well to do Scotland, which would be a little more Presbyterian kind of based in history for us. The last one is a Holy Land tour. I think those are always ideal. You know, people think that's probably the one they'd most like to do. It's also at this point so uncertain in terms of being able to do so safely, right? I've had several friends in other churches over this last year in particular who all had Holy Land trips planned, and they all had to be rerouted or taken and turned into something else. So at least for our initial opportunity to think about this, I think that's the one that seems most tenuous to be able to actually come together. And so maybe something else would be a little easier to kind of think of as a first option, right? So what questions do you have? Again, not wanting to keep you here all afternoon. So, but I do have some brochures from all of these kind of trips here. If anybody wants to take a look and see those. Anything else you might want to know?
Matt, are these online as well with the Elias tour?
They are. That's right. Yeah, Elias doesn't have a Scotland trip, but all the rest you could find on his website as well. Yep. So.
How long was the tour?
So it was technically 10 days. So it took us 2 days to get there. So we finally got there on the evening of day 2, and then 7 days of touring, and then a day to get back. So kind of 7 days of actual touring, but a 10-day trip altogether. So.
But if we went, it would be longer. The typical ones are longer.
Yes, that's right. So to do the Greek islands and some of the other pieces, it probably turns into a 12 to 13 days. Altogether. So. Right. Well, I'll stick around. I'll stick around a bit if you've got other questions for sure. Thank you for seeing a little bit of this. Next piece is next steps, right? Take a look at some of these brochures if you're interested. I'll also maybe send something out and include it maybe in the newsletter or something with just a brief survey. Like, where would you like to go if you had an opportunity to pick, right? What time of year might work best for you, and we'll think about some of those kind of questions and see then what our next steps might be after that. So, great. All right, thank you all so much. Thank you.